Okay, Chairman, we're live on YouTube now.
Right, thank you very much. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to this second virtual meeting of the Western Planning Committee. My name is David Beeman. I'm chairman of this committee. I'm supported this evening by my vice chair, Councillor John Rubini, who is in the room, and also by a number of officers. I think so, anyway, hopefully. Beth Helen Smith, who's Chris French, Philippa Stadden, Barry Devlin, and Kimberly Thorne. Members and officers, please use the hands raised function within Zoom to indicate that you wish to speak, and mute your microphone when you are not speaking, please. Please keep statements brief and to the point. We'll be timing speeches this evening, and an alarm will sound when you have been speaking for 4 minutes. If any members in the meeting lose their connection temporarily, we will pause to allow them time to rejoin the meeting. If the webcast stream fails, we will then adjourn whilst we reset the connection. But all being well, we shall manage to get through tonight unscathed, though, anyway. Let's start. Agenda item 1, minutes. I'm asking you to confirm the minutes of the meeting held on the 23rd of June, which have been published on the council's website. Could you unmute your microphones to indicate your agreement, please? Is it agreed?
Agreed.
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 Agreed. Okay, thank you. Kimberly, are there any apologies for absence, apologies, or substitutions?
Yes, Chairman. We have apologies from Councillor Brian Adams, and Councillor Anna James is attending as a substitute.
Oh, welcome, Anna. Okay. 3, disclosures of interest. Are any declarations of interest received?
None received, Chairman.
Okay. Questions by members of the public. Are there any questions received from members of the public?
None received, Chairman.
Action 5. Any questions from members?
None received, Chairman.
Okay, good. 6. Any relevant updates to government guidance or legislation since the last meeting? Beth, could you please?
Thank you, Chairman. Good evening, members. I have a couple of updates to share with you this evening. Firstly, in relation to hours of construction, you'll be aware that the written ministerial statement of the 13th of May encouraged local planning authorities to approach any requests to extend their construction hours flexibly. That was an informal request at the time, and we've been very clear to developers that we're not prepared to deal with those requests informally. We've been inviting them to submit non-material amendments. You'll be also aware of the Business and Planning Bill, which is due to, well, hopefully receive royal assent. This sets in place a new mechanism for a deemed consent process, which will effectively replace the more informal working hours request process, and it's highly likely that developers will choose to go down this route because it doesn't command a fee, and it also has a penalty of the authority if they don't make a decision within the 14 days excluding bank holidays. The requested extended hours will actually be deemed to have been approved by default. Officers are currently working urgently on a procedure to enable us to process these in a streamlined way to ensure that that doesn't happen. The second item that I'd like to draw your attention to, and clearly this will also rely upon the Business and Planning Bill receiving royal assent, is that the planning permissions with an expiry date for implementation, anything that was due to expire basically from now until I believe the end of the year, has automatically been extended, will automatically be extended, pardon me, until the 1st of April to enable developers to get their ducks in a row to implement, taking into consideration the pandemic, which has thrown something of a spanner in the works for developers. And I think that's it. Thank you, Chairman.
Councillor Edmonds, you have your hand up. Do you want to speak?
Yes, please, Chair. Could we be advised why a request for extended working hours is a non-material amendment? Thank you.
Thank you. Beth?
Thank you, Chairman. Firstly, I would say that the request is initially submitted through the non-material amendment process. It is for the local planning authority ultimately to agree or disagree that it is a non-material amendment. If we disagree, because we have to assess these things on a site-by-site basis, if we disagree, then the more appropriate route would be the Section 73 process. But again, I would emphasise that the government has asked local authorities to demonstrate some flexibility in this in order to get the construction sector back on its feet. Thank you, Chairman.
Councillor Harman, you want to say something? I mean, you're a member of the committee, but I'll let you speak. Councillor Harman?
Thank you indeed. I did indicate to speak on this item in respect of changes to the planning environment, Chairman, which I think members are not fully aware. And that is in respect of the NPPG on appropriate assessment, and in particular the Crondall case. I don't know whether members are aware of the Crondall case, but I do need to ensure that members are advised appropriately in respect of that, as it confirms that the Sweetman judgment overturns the Dilly Lane judgment of 2008, upon which Waverley's strategy and the strategy of the Joint Strategic Partnership Board and Natural England entirely rely. I don't know how many applications we have on the agenda tonight. There were two, and it affected both of those. And I just wish to make sure that officers do advise you that the Crondall case does overturn the Dilly Lane judgment, and therefore also the delivery framework and the entire approach taken by the council and Natural England and the JSPB in respect of the SPAs. And so both applications this evening do by law need to be deferred. And that's all I have to say on that. If the items come forwards, then I have indicated to speak on each of them if necessary, but I hope not. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much. Mr. Devon, do you want to answer that, Barry Devon?
I'm not aware of any European case post-Sweetman which calls into question the approach that the council is taking with regard to appropriate assessments in this matter. I just looked at government guidance that requires a competent authority must take account of mitigation measures intended to avoid or reduce harmful effects of a plan or project as part of an appropriate assessment, and it must conduct such appropriate assessment before making any decision on any plan or project in front of it. And tonight there was at least one matter which wherein the development is mitigated by the provision of buying into Farnham Park, SANG, together with a SAM payment for on-site monitoring and mitigation. So that's entirely accepted within the most recent NPPG guidance as being an entirely suitable way of mitigating development appropriate to Sweetman. That's in government guidance, planning guidance available on the government website. So there is nothing that has recently emerged in European case law which has thrown this approach into legal question, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay. Well, we'll go through each individual. I mean, this is a planning committee. We must remember this, and we'll go through each individual planning application. Okay. Right. Can we go on to the next item, please? Applications for planning permission.
Point of personal explanation, if I may, Chairman. I was referring to the United Kingdom case, which ensures that the ECJ's determination in Sweetman is reflected in UK English law. It is the Crondall case, and you need information in that respect before you make decisions in regards of habitats for both the SPAs. And please bear in mind, Chairman, that the Sweetman case found that the approach taken by Waverley and by our lawyers, all the advice given for the past more than 10 years, has been incorrect. And that as the lawyer says, an assessment must be made, and you don't have one. If you had one, it would be in front of you, and it isn't. And that is what is important. So there is no assessment of the mitigation. That is what's missing. There is no assessment of the mitigation. So thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Chairman, there is indeed a mitigation before you, namely National England's approval of the mitigation in accordance with the strategy adopted by the Joint Strategic Partnership Board, supported by further assessment, which has been indicated as acceptable by Natural England to the planning officer in the matter I think the councillor is referring to. So there's been full assessment of the mitigation of the same proposed.
Right.
The final part the same. We could argue about this all night, Mr. Chairman. I agree. I'll
I want to move on, please. Right, application for planning permission. Beth, can you report an application decided under the temporary delegation to the head of planning and economic development since the start of the new arrangements on 9th of June, please?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Under the new arrangement since the start of June, we have determined for the western area, so that encompasses the former southern area as well. We've determined one planning application, reference WA 2020-0329 for 15 Burnt Hill Way in Recklesham. And that was for the erection of an extension and a dormer window following the demolition of a conservatory, and the decision was issued on the 29th of June. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much. Okay, well, we now move on to the meat of this meeting, I suppose. The application is subject to public speaking. The first one being WA 2020-0029, land at the Heights, 5 Hill Road, Hazelmere. The proposal to erect 22 dwellings following the demolition of the former school buildings and dwelling. First of all, I'd like to ask the officers to update the committee on the reason for the revised recommendation to defer consideration and determination of the application. I presume Chris French will be doing this report. Yes.
Thank you, Chairman, and good evening, members. As set out in the update sheet, we're now recommending withdrawal of this item from tonight's agenda. You'll be aware from the report that the scheme has been amended to remove affordable housing, and we consider it necessary to reconsult with the neighbours on this change to the scheme. A reconsultation began yesterday, and we intend to bring the item back to committee as soon as we're able to do so. Thank you, Chairman.
But that's not likely to be until August, is it? August 4th, possibly?
At the absolute earliest, yeah.
At the absolute earliest, okay. Okay, well, I hope Mr. Hampson didn't mind. I think we were told that it was deferred, Mr. Hampson, so I hope you haven't had a wasted journey, as it were. Right, okay. We've got to put this revised recommendation to you. The consideration of the application will be deferred. Could you unmute your microphones and indicate where your agreement to deferring this application, please? Yes.
Agreed.
No?
Agreed.
Agreed. Right. Good. Excellent. Right. We now move on to the other item, which is due for public speaking, which is WA 2019-1610, land at 18 Moor Park Lane. The proposal of a erection of a new dwelling, a revision of an earlier application, WA 2019-0001. And I'll ask Philippa to present the application, please. She's already sent this out, I think, to everybody as an email. Yes, Philippa.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm just going to share my screen. Okay, thank you, Chairman, and good evening, members. As Councillor Beeman just said, this application is for the erection of a new dwelling at land at 18 Moor Park Lane, and this is a revision of a previous application, WA 2019-0001. I'd just like to draw your attention to the update sheet, which was sent round earlier in the week. Unfortunately, the biodiversity section of the report was omitted in error. Apologies for that. So we're attaching that as an update. And I'd also like to confirm that Natural England have reviewed the appropriate assessment and raised no objections subject to the SAM and SANG payments, which are already secured via a legal agreement. As a couple of verbal updates, I would like to note that we are planning to attach, if this is approved, some additional conditions. These conditions would be one, requiring the submission of the existing and proposed ground levels and finished floor levels to be submitted and agreed in writing. A condition requiring a scheme for electric vehicle charging point to be provided, a scheme for the 110 litres of water condition, and also an additional condition requiring details of permeable or porous driveway to be provided for the dwelling. And just to update members, as the Farnham Neighbourhood Plan has recently been made, the council is only required to demonstrate a 3-year supply in accordance with paragraph 14 of the NPPF. Members will be aware that there is a pending retrospective application for changes in land levels at 18 Moor Park Lane. However, these changes are not in the area which the current application that we're discussing today proposes to erect the new dwelling. The curtilage of the proposed dwelling is unaffected by this application. As such, this does not form a material consideration as part of this application. But just for your reference, on this slide, you will see that the red line is all in the same ownership as that owner of 18 Moor Park Lane. For the area we're considering today, which I'll come on to in more detail shortly.
Philippa, sorry, we're looking at the wrong slide, Philippa. Can you move it forward?
No, this is a slide that's just showing the. Oh. Okay, sorry, it's moved on my screen. Let me try again. Does that move? Yeah. What I'll do, members, apologies for this. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and then share it again and see if that's working. Bear with me. That move? Yeah. Great. Apologies, members. So as I was saying, the red line for the retrospective application is the same as the whole entire line for the application we're considering today, but the changes in land levels are located. So I'm having some technical difficulties, members. Apologies. Okay. Sorry, members, I'll carry on as best I can. Having some tough technical difficulties. So the application, the retrospective application of the changes in land levels is based to the rear of the existing dwelling at number 18 and not to the west of the dwelling, which is the site that we're considering today. And as I was saying, this does not form part of the consideration of today's application. Is that changing there? What's that?
Philippa, have you emailed this presentation out to everybody, haven't you?
Yeah, I don't know if you can all see it. I'm just trying to fix the issue at the moment. Do apologise.
Philly, if you want me to try and share my
Yeah,
screen.
could you try that? It's not working for me.
I'm on mute. Can everyone see that screen?
Yes.
Great, thank you, Fiona. And I'll let you know when I need you to change the slide. I do apologise, members. Right, so moving on to the location plan for the application we're considering tonight. So the application is located to the north of Moor Park Lane on the island in the centre of the Shepperton Flock roundabout. The site is to the west of 18 Moor Park Lane, which is a detached two-storey dwelling with a number of outbuildings within the applicant's ownership. The site currently forms overgrown scrubland and rises in level from south to north away from the road. And despite its location within the roundabout, the area has a semi-rural feel and features a linear cluster of residential properties. And Moor Park Lane is a public right-of-way. Next slide, please, Fiona. Here we see an aerial view of the site, and you'll see the blue dot in the centre shows the location of the application site within the roundabout. Thank you. Next slide. Members will be aware from the officer report that there is the planning history as a material consideration here. Planning application WA 2019-0001 was refused owing to its design, bulk and scale, which would result in material harms to the appearance of the area and street scene and the area of strategic visual importance, and would result in less than substantial harm to the setting of the nearby listed building. Here we can see the elevations of the previous refusal, and on the next slide we can see the floor plan. So it's important to bear in mind here that the only reason for refusal for this application was on design grounds and the impact that that design had on the area. So the principle of a dwelling in this location has been considered acceptable previously. It was the design and impact of that design and the scale and bulk that was considered inappropriate in the previous application. Thank you, Fiona. Apologies for the sort of quality of the plans, are a little hard to read on the slide, but here we see of the proposed block plan. We see the detached two-storey dwelling proposed to the west of 18 Moor Park Lane with access from 18 Moor Park Lane there, with a separate curtilage to the remaining dwelling at 18 Moor Park Lane. Thank you. So I've put photos on whole slides here, so hopefully they're a little bit clearer for you to see today. So photograph A is taken from the west looking along Moor Park Lane towards the existing dwelling. The next photograph is taken from the west looking towards the existing dwelling, 18 Moor Park Lane. The next photograph is taken from the south looking towards the siting of the dwelling. So where you can see that fencing, that would be the curtilage of number 18. So just to the left of that would be the access for the new dwelling. Next slide, please. So photograph D is a similar view but stepped back slightly, showing the garden curtilage of number 18, and to the left is where the proposed dwelling would be located. Yeah, next slide, thank you. So this application is taken from the north looking back towards number 18. So you can see the extent of their garden amenity area, and then on the next slide you can see the location of the proposed dwelling on that area of scrubland there to be cleared. And the next slide, please. So taken from the northeast looking towards the siting of the dwelling, there you can see where the access would be and where the dwelling would be located. Next slide, please. And this is taken from the east looking again towards where the dwelling and garden would be located. And the final photograph is, thank you, shows the rear of the site. Right, next slide, please. Oh, so again, just so it's clearer for you to see, I've put the proposed elevations on separate slides for you. So this slide shows the proposed southern front elevation, which would face Moor Park Lane. Next one. And this is the western side elevation, where you can see where the dwelling would be built into the land levels. Next one, please. And this is the northern rear elevation. And next one. And this is the eastern side elevation. Thank you. Here we see the proposed floor plans. Great, and moving on to the main matters for consideration. So the planning history and differences with the previous proposal. So as I said earlier, it's a material consideration that the principle of a dwelling on this site was considered acceptable in the previous application, albeit it was refused on design grounds alone. With regard to heritage considerations, officers consider that the revised design submitted with the current application reflects an early 20th century arts and crafts building not too dissimilar to number 18. Officers consider that the design of the proposed dwelling would be in keeping with the character of the surrounding area. On this basis, the proposal would have an acceptable visual impact on the potential future conservation area of the Shefflin Block roundabout. The proposed dwelling would be located approximately 40 metres to the northeast of 5 Moor Park Lane, or Bourne Place, which is a locally listed building, and Bourne Place, which is Grade 2 listed building. The Council's Heritage Officer has been consulted on the proposal, and officers consider that the revised design submitted with the current application does respond to the character of the surrounding area, and as such would enhance the appearance. In light of the above, the proposal would not result in harm to the significance of the heritage asset, and as such would preserve the special interest and setting of the listed building. With regard to design and impact on visual amenity and the ASVI, the previous scheme was considered to be out of keeping with the character of the area, given its plain appearance, bulk and scale. The revised design has removed the previously proposed garage, which has significantly reduced the width of the proposed built form. Further, the proposed dwelling would be 2 stories in height, but would be built into the slope of the land, with the eastern elevation appearing as single story. Officers consider that this would reduce the bulk and prominence of the dwelling. With regard to the impact on residential amenity, the closest dwelling would be the host dwelling at number 18, and a condition is recommended to obscurely glaze the bathroom window, which is the only window that faces that property. On this basis, officers consider that there would be an acceptable impact on residential amenity, and there are no other dwellings in close proximity to the dwelling that would be affected. With regard to standard of accommodation and amenity space, the proposed bedroom sizes would exceed the standards and would provide space for internal storage, and all bedrooms would have adequate light and outlook. The proposed dwelling would have its own private garden, which would be of a suitable size for the proposed dwelling. Officers therefore raise no concerns in this regard. Further, there is sufficient space on site for both waste and bicycle storage. With regard to highways, access and parking, the application site is accessed via a private road which does not form part of the public highway. The County Highway Authority consider that the proposed development would not result in a significant increase in vehicular trips on the surrounding highway. Sufficient parking is provided on site, and there's an informative attached to the officer report reminding the applicant that it is an offence to obstruct or divert a route of public right of way unless carried out in accordance with the relevant legislation. With regards to the impact on trees, it's noted that there may be some pressure to remove trees. However, this is not sufficient concern to raise objection, owing to the fact that the site has been largely cleared, as you saw from the photographs. The landscape and tree officer has recommended attaching a condition in respect of the agreement of a landscaping scheme to prevent any unacceptable harm in this regard. With regard to effect on the SPA, having regard to the signed and completed legal agreement, the effect on the SPA would be mitigated. Thank you, members. Thank you, Chairman.
Okay, thank you very much. We can hear me, Sally. Public speaking on this item, we've got, well, we have 3 speakers. The first one being Councillor Scotty Fraser from Farnham Town Council. Scotty, your turn, Councillor Fraser.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good evening to committee members.
4 minutes.
Beg your pardon?
You've got 4 minutes, Scotty.
Oh, thank you.
The
The Planning Consultative Group of Farnham Town Council wish to make a strong representation to this Western Area Planning Committee of the Waverley Borough Council to oppose the recommendation of planning officers that permission for this application be granted. Much mention is made in the text of the agenda regarding the arts and crafts aspects exemplified in the revised dwelling design. I would assure the committee that, in my opinion, there are few elements in the design that will be recognised by Pugin, Ruskin or William Morris. There is little authenticity in the use of materials or function in it. Rather, the design appears to be a Disneyland Tudor Beetham parody. Little else has changed, but a slightly reduced footprint and the absence of a garage. All else remains substantially as before. So the litany of broken regulations, the disregard of planning protocol, environmental harm, detrimental impact on neighbours' well-being, and damage to the setting of listed buildings and bridleways, etc., remains valid for you to read in the agenda details. Perhaps amongst the more visually damaging aspects are the extensive earthworks. With a more sensitive attention to existing contours, quarry-like excavations and intended retaining walls could have been avoided. Still, I dare say this could be rectified by putting all the earth back again if the retrospective application is not granted. Transgressions in the application are legion. The National Planning Policy Framework, the provisions of Waverley's local plan and the Farnham Neighbourhood Plan in their various incarnations, rules covering the area of significant visual importance, bylaws covering the use of footpaths and bridleways, even common property law, all have been jeopardised or willfully ignored. As for recommendations covering heritage aspects, disruption of biodiversity, highways and traffic, rights of access and parking provisions, disruption of drainage and slope stability, appearance and street scene, all these appear to have been overlooked to a significant degree where they proved to be convenient to the applicant to do so. Farnham Council would recommend to this committee that the application therefore be refused. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Fraser. Right. I now have the ward councillor, Councillor Andy McLeod, who should speak to the committee. And of course, apart from the 4 minutes now, he also has 4 minutes after the event, after the debate has ended. So, Councillor McLeod.
Thank you, Chairman. As you say, I'm one of the 2 ward councillors for Moor Park, and this application is within the Moor Park ward, the other being Councillor Martin, who's on the committee. And we jointly agreed to call this application into the committee. For transparency reasons, I should actually say that I'm one of the 2 portfolio holders for planning at Waverley Borough Council, but that doesn't really affect what I say at this meeting. I called it in together with Councillor Martin because we have quite a number of concerns about this application. Unfortunately, not all of the concerns that we have are planning matters, and I always read the neighbourhood responses very carefully. And again, unfortunately, many of the reasons cited by neighbours as objections aren't necessarily planning matters. And I just want to briefly mention that because the planning officers, of course, have to go by planning rules, I'm afraid, and they don't always correspond to common sense. Things like the fact that there may or may not have been unauthorised work done on the neighbouring site, that's not a planning matter, and that would be not regarded as important at any appeal. Things like the fact that there may be additional traffic on the roundabout has to be severe, and no planning inspector would regard 1 or 2 extra journeys from just one house as being sufficiently severe. Also, people are always astonished by the fact that who owns land is not a planning matter. It's pointed out by some of the neighbours that the bridleway is in private ownership, and that therefore the planning application shouldn't succeed. In fact, you can make a planning application for another people's land if you wish to. What it actually means, if you don't own the land, you won't be able to enforce it. You won't be able to achieve your planning application. So that may stop the application being actually carried out, but it's not a relevant factor and stop it being granted. So what can you validly consider? And it's very much the sort of thing that Scotty's been talking about in his presentation, the objection to the town council that the bulk and development of the material of the development would cause material harm to the area and the street scene, and it would cause substantial harm to the setting of nearby buildings and the heritage aspect. The Shepherd and Flock area is very much a heritage area. We've all heard of the Battle of Moor Park, which took part in 1897. The proposal appears to be out of line with FNP1 of the Farnham Neighbourhood Plan, which is an important consideration. And one of the applicants has raised concern about it being in conflict with the biodiversity of the area. So there are good reasons in which the committee can turn this down, but they have to actually, I'm afraid, ignore some of the ones that I mentioned earlier, because that wouldn't help us at any appeal. So thank you, Mr. Chairman. That's what I want to say. I do wish to recommend to the committee that they refuse this application. Thank you, Chairman.
Well, thank you very much. And obviously you have the right to come back at the end of it if you still wish. Okay.
Thank you, Chairman.
Okay, right. I think, yes, Councillor Hyman, you wish to speak on this again?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Yes, I'm sorry that it's necessary, but you've already been advised that apparently the approach that the decision of the ECJ and the Sweetman judgment doesn't apply to us. The fact is, there are documents which people might like to call appropriate assessments, but the law has determined in Sweetman and in Crondall, in the UK case, we all know where Crondall is, it applies to this committee, to our council, as well as everywhere else, that we must have an assessment of the effectiveness of the mitigation. And I think we all know that if such an assessment existed, then officers would not have accepted that a moratorium was necessary following the Sweetman judgment in 2018. And quite clearly, if such an assessment of the effectiveness of the mitigation existed, then Natural England and officers and the Joint Strategic Board would be perfectly happy to put it in front of you to prove me wrong and stop me from coming along pointing out that we have no authority to grant consent to applications such as this. We cannot just say the effect on the spa would be mitigated. We have to have that assessment of the mitigation, and it doesn't exist. So I would recommend that members simply ask officers for the assessment of the mitigation, and unless one is stuck in front of you tonight, either refuse consent as you should or defer to obtain that assessment. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much, Councillor Hyman. Right, open up to debate. Already one hand up, and that's from Councillor Martin.
Can I give a brief statement from the residents of Shepherd and Flock?
These are, yes, please do, because these are residents who've spoken to you directly, yes?
Yes. We object to the granting of planning permission for the erection of a new dwelling and the further excavation of the site. The site has been subject to considerable unauthorised encroachment, excavation, building, clearing of mature trees over the past few years. The majority of working occurring over weekends and bank holidays, and has been and still is the subject of retrospective planning applications. These actions have been to the detriment of neighbours and residents. If the permission is granted, considerable further engineering works will be required to set the new dwelling into the site, together with the installation of retaining walls with the consequent effects on the stability of the surrounding area, i.e. the road around the Shepherd and Flock roundabout, as well as the effects on drainage and the environmental balance. The application is not compliant with Farnham Neighbourhood Plan Policy FMP1 and ASV1, nor does it conform to the heritage of the site or the character of the surrounding area, which is a potential conservation area. The only access to the site is via a bridleway, which has a long history and has remained almost unchanged over the past century. The bridleway is the only access to the ANOB lying to the east of the railway line. The increased traffic flow will conflict with the usage of the bridleway as an access to the footpaths within the ANOB. The lane is believed to be the historic route from Winchester to Canterbury. Number 18 is the site where the last Riot Act was read in England. However, it has been destroyed by flagrant disregard to its history and environment. We believe that if this planning application is granted, it will be detrimental to the surrounding area of historic value and a loss to Farnham residents of a small piece of our heritage.
Thank you very much. Councillor Edmonds and Councillor Coburn.
Thank you, Chair. I have two concerns basically. One is on planning enforcement. The Waverley Borough Council enforcement plan advises of significant resource limitations in terms of enforcement and monitoring conditions. I think under these circumstances, there's a potential problem. The National Planning Policy Framework states effective enforcement is important to maintain public confidence. In this area, we seem to have lost public confidence. So what we need to make sure is that any condition that is imposed on this development can actually be monitored and enforced. At the moment, I have little confidence that that's the case. The second point I'd like to make is that the Good Design Guide talks about the access of utility and emergency vehicles. Judging from the road access to this property, there will be significant difficulty for both. Under those circumstances, I do have a problem with access. And the final point is, this property has no access to public transport by walking. Therefore, it is limited to people that have the ability to own and run and drive vehicles. Under those circumstances, it is limited access to a number of the public. Those are the issues I am concerned about in approving this development. And under those circumstances, unless further information and evidence arises, I would reject the application.
Thank you very much. Councillor Coburn, then Councillor Martin again. Councillor Coburn.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm very disappointed with this. You know, I take the point that the officer made that there is a principle of development on this site. Whether or not I approve of that is irrelevant now. But I'm extremely worried about the design of this site and the size and the space around it. I just think it's poor. And one of the reasons I think it's poor is we've seen time and time again, people come in, they bend an application, they talk about the different levels, and then when they come to build it, it all goes pear-shaped. We've got an eyesore in the Bourne, which is excruciating, because basically it was a very innovative design. And then when they came to develop it, it didn't work. This one's different. It's trying to pretend it's arts and crafts. It's taken away an integral garage. We are trying to introduce in Farnham, as well as doing the neighbourhood plan, we are trying to upgrade the design statement, and we are talking about the integration of parking. Here we have a largish house. I honestly don't see that this design has overcome the issues we had with the previous one. Certainly not in sort of bulk and height. It may have taken up the garage, but then you just have a space for cars, and then you've got to put them somewhere, and hey presto, they'll come in a bit later for a garage, which we'll find very hard to refuse on reasonable grounds. So I think this is still too big. I think it's inappropriate. I think the space around the dwelling is going to be inappropriate. This is a very unusual roundabout, as anyone who's walked on it. And he's got some lovely buildings, as they say it. We're looking at trying to develop it as a conservation area. It really is in its own way unique. And to bring in something like this as a development, which, you know, I just think it's poor. I think it's unimaginative. And I think if you look at the whole of the island and work out what could go on this site, if it's got principle, then you could put something on with a much, much better relationship to the heritage buildings around it. So I think this is a missed opportunity. I don't think it does comply with the FMP1 or even TD1. I just think it's a piece of land and they've shoved a house in the middle. They've messed it around a bit because of the levels, and I really would be very surprised if they don't come back in. I don't like the idea of the amenity space being adequate and then putting 2.5 cars, as we all know, everyone has 2.5 cars, putting that in. So I just feel ultimately we're going to be giving permission for something here that will not look the part in the years to come. And we are supposed to be giving permission for houses that we can be proud of for the future. So I'm disappointed. I think there is a house for this site if the principle has been established, but I'm sorry, I really don't think it's this one. And I don't think it's been thought through enough. I think this is a quick cobble together to overcome 1 or 2 points, but I don't think it addresses the main issue with the size and bulk of a dwelling on an amenity space that is not going to be fit for a house of this size. And so therefore, I'm afraid I can't support this.
Thank you very much, Councillor. 4 hands now. Councillor Martin again, and Councillor Deere, followed by Councillor Clark and Councillor Hess.
The planning application on this states the test is to whether changes to the current proposal have overcome the previously refused scheme. In reference to page 58 of the agenda, the design and impact, the scale and bulk of the application. The revised design has removed a single garage. So does taking out a single garage reduce the bulk and scale? No. However, the bulk and scale and size have only been reduced by a mere 9%, less than the first application that was refused. There has been no significant decreases in bulk scale. It's still a 4-bedroom house. A significant change would be a 2-bedroom cottage. In the first application, the building was to be built into the slope. Therefore, there has been no change in bulk or scale in this second application. And on page 61, despite the extent of mature tree removal on the site, the lane retains a verdant appearance. However, on page 62 of the agenda, it states there will be, in foreseeable future, pressure to further denude the landscape of trees to improve light levels to the new property and should not be considered a strong reason for refusal. Is it me, or has Waverley just declared a climate emergency to conserve biodiversity? I really don't understand the rationale behind this report. It fails in the justification of planning to be granted, as there has been no significant change to the planning application in bulk and scale. In the refusal application, officers stated for it to be acceptable that the dwelling would need to be substantially reduced in scale and bulk. There is no evidence for this. 9% is not a significant reduction. It is still a large 4-bedroom house minus a single garage. I therefore cannot see why this planning application should be granted.
Thank you very much. Councillor Deere.
Hello, Chairman. Good evening to you. I agree with the refusal of the previous application. That seems to be to have come from the second drawdown of some of the stock of rather borings. And I note it was refused on the grounds of design, bulk and scale, you know, the usual policy D1, D4, which I think was the appropriate decision to make at the time. However, I think the revised drawings that we have in front of us tonight are attractive and imaginative in appearance. I do think they address the design, bulk and the scale problems that were presented previously. My only reservation is that the drawings aren't annotated, and if the committee was minded to give consent, I would like to see the highest possible standards of materials and external finishes used to complement what I think is a very nice and attractive design. And as I say, I think it's been made clear that the principles of a building here and at issue, it's the appearance, bulk and scale of the thing. And to my mind, this is entirely acceptable and a huge improvement on what was presented previously. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Chair. I must say I agree with Councillor Coburn. It's a big disappointment. I don't think it's gone far enough. It's not gone far enough in two directions. It's not gone far enough in reducing the scale, and it's not gone far enough in a decent design. To be quite honest, the sketches that we saw earlier looked as if they could have been done in the back of a fact packet. The other concern I have is parking. It's all well and good to have some parking, 2 or 3 cars on site, but what happens when they've got visitors? The visitors are going to block the bridleway, and that is illegal. So I cannot accept this application. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Hess and then Councillor Rubini. Where is he?
It's all right, I'm here, don't worry.
Oh, I'm not worried.
Just clicking all the buttons. Good evening, Chair.
Good evening to you.
I'd like to ask the officer if she could go back to the drawings and clarify for all of us which land is subject to the enforcement action regarding the removal of, I don't know if you call it soil, spoil, the bulk of the land that's been excavated away. What part of the land is subject to the enforcement action, and whether that is the same land that the house is planned to be built on. Because if we're talking about the same land, it strikes me, and I have raised this earlier, it strikes me as a very strange anomaly that we could be considering the approval of a house on land which is currently subject to enforcement action at Waverley Borough Council. So we just need a bit of clarity about which land we're talking about. Thank you.
Good question. Philippa, do you want to answer that question now?
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, I will try and share my screen again.
Okay.
Hopefully this will work this time.
Oops.
So this is the dwelling at number 18 here, and it's the land here that is subject to the land levels application. So the proposed dwelling is here. Does that answer your question, Councillor Hess?
So the enforcement action is behind the existing house?
Yeah, up here.
Right, okay. Thank you for clarifying that. Yes, thank you.
Rubini.
Thank you, Chairman.
Sorry, Mr. Chairman, there is no actual enforcement action yet.
No, I
understand
okay,
it.
But I understand.
Investigations.
Investigations.
Thank you,
yes, I
Mr. Chairman.
understand that, yes, yeah, you are right, Mr. Devlin, yes. Councillor Rubini.
Thank you, Chairman. I looked at all the drawings and everything before I came tonight to have a look and see what I thought. And I must be honest, the local councillors are convincing me about the bulk and that bridleway, that this should not be passed. I don't know the area very well. However, from what they're saying, if that is only a small reduction to the bulk and they don't appreciate the design, it doesn't fit in, and I'm very much minded to listen to the local views, and again about the bridleway. I would hate to see a right of way blocked because a visitor went to a house. Thank you.
Thank you very much. One more hand left. It's Councillor Martin, third time. Go on, Councillor Martin, you have third by the tray, as it were.
I'm going to ask questions about photos H and I, which has been sent to us by email.
Yes, go on.
Is the applicant saying this is her property and this is where her the site's garden will be?
Shall I answer that? I'll try and share my screen again. Just bear with me. So photograph H, I took myself when I was stood. If I can just go back to the previous one, I took that when I was stood here.
Well,
so, and same with I.
Number H and I, you are taking photograph of the next door's property who have bees on it. This isn't owned by the applicant. So I don't know how she says that this is going to be her garden.
Oh, well.
So if we go to the location plan, just bear with me.
Her neighbour has a garden licence from Surrey County Council to keep bees on this land. It isn't owned by the applicant.
Well, it is our understanding through the documents that have been submitted with the application that this is in ownership.
No, she does not have ownership of this piece of land.
Okay. Mr. Devlin, do you want to comment?
No. On the right of way question, Mr. Chairman, the obstruction of a right of way is a criminal offence under the Highways Act 1980 and is a matter for the County Council to enforce against if there is actually an incursion or an obstruction. I think we've put a condition on the proposed planning consent document if members were minded to approve, making it a condition that there be no incursion on any public right of way. I believe it abuts the site in any event, but any right of way crossing or abutting the site.
Okay, thank you very much. All right, okay. Right. Two hands, Councillor Murray and Councillor James. Councillor Murray.
Thank you, Chairman. With regard to that last thing Barry Devlin said, but when you say, you know, there can't be any incursion, we've had this before with things. Yeah, who's going to be there to work that one out? And on top of that, it causes huge problems if people flout that. It's already tricky, this whole thing anyway. And it's just socially very difficult to keep on dealing with somebody who just keeps flouting the laws. So I don't think that's a good enough, you know, when you say to people, you mustn't do that unless you've actually got a really proper way of stopping that. I don't think that's a very helpful thing. I also just wanted to point out that scrubland is actually hugely important. I know people just go, it's just scrubland, it doesn't matter. It does matter. It's where we're all about biodiversity here. And I just want to point this out, that scrubland shouldn't be seen as land that's not of any use to wildlife. It's where thickets are, where lots of wildlife lives. And so I think when that comes up, I'd like people not to just consider it as something that's, you know, nothing lives on it and it's not worthy of anything but being tarmacked over. With regard to the actual building itself, I don't see that it has really reduced in size very much at all. And I think I can't work out whether it's going to end up with a tiny little space for a garden. I can't, you know, we keep getting these huge houses with poster stamp gardens, but apart from anything else, that area is so beautiful. It is so lovely, and it really deserves better than what it is being offered now. So for my money, I wouldn't be waving this one through. Thanks.
Yeah, and Councillor James.
Thank you, Chairman. I think we were told at the beginning that whether the garden belongs to somebody else is not a planning matter. I mean, I could apply to build on Buckingham Palace Garden, but the fact that the Queen wouldn't let me means I can't build it. You know, so the ownership of the land, in my view, doesn't matter. But in my view, having seen the previous application and the design of that, this is completely different. And quite frankly, it's much nicer than a Barratt box that we've been looking at all over the district. And half of it is hidden because of the levels of the land. So whilst I understand that the local people are objecting to it, and that is everybody's right, I would be supporting the officers, providing that in the conditions that it only says that there can't be any windows and things to the eastern side. Well, I'd like to make sure that they can't put a dormer window or a Velux window in any of the roof lines to enable them to actually start putting another room up in the attic, which is my, as most the previous councillors know, is my big beef. So permitted development rights on the eastern side is one thing, but the Veluxes in a roof is absolutely a no-go on that design. And bridleways, again, that's not the planning matter for the building of a house. And so I will be supporting the officers. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much. I've got 3 more hands, and then unless somebody, I think we've been around everywhere, I think. Philippa, you want to come back? Councillor Dixon and Councillor Hunt.
Thank you, Chairman. Just to pick up on a couple of things, as Councillor James just said, the ownership of the land would not be relevant to the consideration here. However, we would like to note that the applicant has signed certificate A to say that they do own that land, but as Councillor James said, that's not relevant to the assessment here. And also, just picking up on Councillor James's point about the removing PD, yes, we could extend that condition to cover the western elevation and to ensure that there are no roof lights inserted in the roof slope. We can do that. Thank you.
Councillor Dixon.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, just to say that when I was researching this application, I had a quick look at both the Surrey County Council website and some websites on the laws around bridleways. I did check on Surrey County Council. This Moor Park Lane is not a road, it is actually a bridleway. And there are a few houses, farms at the bottom of it. And obviously historically farmers have to have access to their land, but I don't think we should be encouraging any more traffic on that because the rules on bridleways are clear from what I can see. The definition I found was that bridleways are meant for walkers, horse riders and bicyclists, and the bicycles are expected to give way to both walkers and horse riders. And I think this house just invites itself to have 2 Range Rovers parked outside, so I just cannot agree to this because of the increased traffic onto an unmade road. And I also share Councillor James's, it has a very high roof on it and it really invites itself to be putting roofs in the attic. And I can see there is a condition saying they shouldn't put additional rooms, but I think it'd be too tempting not to. So that's why I'll probably be voting against this. Thank you.
Councillor Hunt.
Thank you, Chair. So I think for me, I agree with Councillor James, I think, and Councillor Deer in that I think the design, you can see they have made an effort versus the application that was declined to improve the design and kind of match it with you know, surrounding properties, if you like, notwithstanding, you know, what materials they may be using to do that. But I do think the pictures show an effort to you know, to improve the design considerably. I think the problem is that, you know, in terms of reducing the bulk and scale of the property, they've not really done that at all. So whilst they've improved the design, they're still trying to shoehorn as large a property as possible, you know, as they can into the site that they've got available. And you know, I think the parking is definitely an issue when you've got a 4-bedroom house. There are going to be a couple of cars and there are going to be visitors as well. So I think, you know, they have made an effort, but it's just a shame that they haven't really reduced the size of the house further so that it fits into the area and reduces the impact on the parking.
Thank you very much. Right. Mr. Devlin, you want to come back? Yes. Where is he gone?
On a bridle-way question, Mr. Chairman.
Well, you got your hand up.
My
Got your hand up.
understanding from my colleagues is there's no bridle-way across the site.
Right.
There's one about away from the site on the boundaries, not on the site, Mr. Chairman.
Okay.
Yes, certification of ownership has been given in the planning application. If that was shown to be incorrect, there could be a prosecution under the Planning Act. Practical problem of implementing the permission on somebody else's land. In some instances, planning permissions have been revoked on judicial review where incorrect certification of ownership or notice to owner being set out in the planning application. Anything else, Mr. Chairman?
No, thank you. I'm just going to say, I just want to say here, we've got to relate to those planning matters, and we are straying a little away from that, actually. Unless somebody else wants, do you want to speak again, Councillor Dixon, before I go to Councillor MacLeod?
Yeah, sorry, just come back.
All right.
I hate to contradict Mr. Devlin,
yeah.
But when you look, well, I mean, the papers that have been presented to us, it actually says that the Surrey Roads and Transport have actually said that they are not worried about the traffic from this, because they're not worried about the traffic which is basically going onto the Hog's Back. But they say that the road which the house is being on is not a road. It actually says that in the paper before us. And I can send a link to Mr. Devlin of the Surrey County Council, which shows that it's not a road, or at least what I've seen. It is a bridleway, and it actually says in the papers that we've got in front of us, it's a bridleway and it's not a road. And that's why the only reason Surrey Roads are saying this is not going to add to the traffic is because they're only looking at the Hog's Back, which is next door. So I just thought I'd add that to clarify.
I will say that, you know, we are straying away from some planning reasons anyway. Councillor MacLeod, do you want to sum up?
Thank you, Chairman. Just a few brief remarks. I'd just like to say that I think it's been a very good discussion, and I'm pleased that the great majority of councillors have focused on issues that probably would stand up at appeal. Obviously, design is very much a subjective matter, and Councillor Dale and Councillor James disagree with what appears to be the majority view on the committee, but we wait and see how the vote works out. But I think there have been some very good contributions from pretty well all of the councillors along the right lines, and I wouldn't like to particularly pick too many people out, but I think Scottish Fraser's contribution and Councillor Coburn's contribution are very much on the ball, and very much the sort of reasons that we should be putting forward for refusal. There's very little point in putting forward reasons for refusal that a planning inspector would overrule or ignore. So I think we should focus very much on the design issues as set out by most of the councillors, but particularly by Scotty Fraser and by Councillor Coburn. So thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Right. I now have to put the recommendation to grant planning permission subject to conditions 1 to 10 and informatives 1 to 4, plus, well, no more amendments. And I'm going to ask Kimberly to put up a poll and ask members to vote on the screen, please. See, crossing fingers. Ah. So everyone's voted, Kimberly.
Speaker against.
Against.
Yes. Yes, Kimberly.
Mr. Chairman, if I can clarify,
yeah,
I have submitted a vote against, and Jackie has just stated she is against.
Okay, thank you very much. I appreciate that. Yes, we got you sharing. Yes. Oh dear. Oh well, that's very clear cut. I think the recommendation of grant planning permission is therefore refused. Now we need an alternative recommendation and seconder. Does anybody wish to make a recommendation on planning grounds, please? Planning reasons. Councillor Coburn, you're generally very good at these things. Anyone else? No. Well,
yes, Chairman, I was just going to make the recommendation to refuse planning and come back with the reasons when I have a second.
Okay, well.
I second you, Carol.
Councillor Coburn, yes, okay. Seconded by Councillor Martin, yeah. And the reasons being, yes.
Hang on a minute. Right, the first reason, it's from my point of view, it's totally against policy FMP1 of the neighbourhood plan, new development and conservation, on so many grounds: height, scale, density, layout, design and materials of buildings, boundary treatment, scale and design. So, you know, I think it contravenes policy FNP1 on so many reasons that it's just unacceptable.
Thank you. Right, the officer prepared. Is the officer happy with that alternative recommendation, please? Yes, I presume they are. Are they? Do I go to Barry for that, or do I go to Philippa?
Yes, that's fine.
Okay. Do we have a voting panel for that? I don't know if we prefer this or not. Or are we going to say, oh, well, alternative, yeah, right. For those, can you vote please again? Just click on the link and again, okay, alternative recommendation.
Four.
Okay, thank you. Right. All right, well, that is carried quite clearly. Okay, right, thank you very much. The recommendation as outlined is therefore carried. So it is
Excuse me,
refused.
sorry, Chairman. I'm so sorry for interrupting.
Oh, yeah.
Could we perhaps add some other policies to keep the Farnham Neighbourhood Plan Policies Company? I suggest probably TD1, D1, D4 of the Part 1 plan and 2002 plan, respectively. Thank you.
Anybody got any objection to that? I've got hands.
Mr. Chairman, would it help if I read out a reason for refusal?
Yes,
so that we could...
Yes, a good idea.
That'd be helpful. Okay, let's go with the proposed development by virtue of its design, bulk and scale would result in material harm to the appearance of the area and street scene. In conflict with policies TD1 and HA1, oh no, sorry, TD1 of the local plan part 1 2018, retain policies D1 and D4 of the Waverley Borough Local Plan 2002 and policy FMP1 of the Farnham Neighbourhood Plan. Yeah.
Anybody got any dissent from that? Councillor Edmonds?
Thank
Can
you,
I
Chair.
suggest we just retake the poll now that everyone knows the full reasons for refusal?
Sorry, can I speak, Chair? Or...
Well, are you going to add to the recommendations or what?
Oh, yes.
Oh, I see. What are you going to say then?
What about sorry, policy D4, design and layout, paragraph H, provides safe access for pedestrians and road users and where appropriate servicing facilities. Sorry, servicing facilities.
Right. Oh, yeah, it's covered by D4, isn't it? Councillor Coburn, do you want to add anything?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I mean, I don't think these new plans overcome the reasons for refusal for the last one. I think it's important that we say that you know, we still feel that the scale and bulk, and I know that they're covered in those policies, but then we have disagreed with the officers. But the other thing is about design incorporating cars. I mean, good design absorbs cars. It doesn't leave cars sort of open, as it were. And certainly we're looking at the Building for Life, which I know we haven't adopted as a council, but we are talking about having adequate and suitably integrated parking, because just taking out a garage, which is what they've done here, just means you're going to have 3 or 4 cars lying around in front of a house. And to me, that is just poor design. So anywhere we can incorporate that, but, this particular application has not fully overcome the reasons for refusal of the previous one, and in fact creates some issues. I don't know how we put that, and always rely on the officers putting it slightly better than I do, but that I think is something that's important. I think they have not improved the design, and in fact by taking out the garage and the storage have actually in some ways worsened the design.
Right. Beth, what is your suggest, officers?
Chairman, if I may,
Yes,
I wonder
sure,
whether
sure.
Councillor Coburn's point is covered by virtue of the design bulk and scale not being in accordance. Would that cover the parking concerns, do you think?
Are you happy with that, Councillor Coburn?
Not for the parking. I mean, yes, for the scale and bulk, because I think that they're the ones that are listed in all those policies, the design policies. But I think to put a house on in what's effectively a sort of conservation area where we would like to see the best of all possible designs, to make the change simply by taking out a garage, which then begs the question of storage space in the future. We had last week, we had somebody coming back in for a garage. What are we trying to achieve? And as far as I'm concerned, what we should achieve on that site, we achieve in a oneness. So we have a house of the right proportions with the necessary storage space for whatever's going to be on that site. So I am worried about squeezing a large house into a plot that's becoming gradually smaller and then adding on, 2.5, 3 cars. I know what it's like when you've got children learning to drive, the cars multiply. So basically, I just feel this is such a poor design, to just take out a garage rather than really redesign something of size. And I just really want to make that point, that I don't think this design, including the lack of storage space for cars, the lack of integrated parking for cars, is actually going to enhance the heritage assets on this site, which, as I say, is being looked at as a conservation area. I'm just not sure that this is of a high enough quality for the site.
Mr. French, you want to add something? Because we really need to conclude this. Come on, Mr. French.
Hello, thank you, Chairman. I think the focus should really be on the design points rather than any technical points, and largely whether it's overcome the reason for refusal of the previous scheme. So I think we've read out previously the previous reason for refusal. Is that what you're intending to carry forward? I think is the question. Yes. Thank you, Chairman.
I think we've debated this and we really need to come to a conclusion. Could you read it out again, Philippa, so that we all know what we want to vote on? Again. Oh, somebody read it? Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Chair. I think we need to be clear as to whether we are standing by the exact wording of the previous reason for refusal, which also encompassed concerns regarding the setting of the listed building, because that hasn't followed the discussion so much tonight, or whether we're going with the reason for refusal that I read out shortly previously, which did not refer to those things. I think I'd like to be clear.
Yes, fair point. Could you read out again what you propose?
Yeah, shall I read out what
Yes,
I read
please.
previously? Yep. The proposed development, by virtue of its design, bulk and scale, would result in material harm to the appearance of the area and street scene, in conflict with policies TD1 of the Local Plan Part 1 2018, retains policies D1 and D4 of the Waverley Borough Local Plan 2002, and policy FMP1 of the Farnham Neighbourhood Plan.
I'm happy to go with that.
If you're happy to go with that, Chairman, I'll relaunch the poll just to.
Otherwise, we'll be here all night. I see you. Please vote.
4.
4.
Thank you. If everyone else has voted, I'll share the results, and that's
the same as last time, isn't it? I think.
Similarly, yes.
Anyway.
12 in favour of refusal and 2 against.
Okay. Well, it's not the offer. The recommendation is carried that it is refused due to those reasons. Right. Thank you very much. Well, there's nothing else on the agenda for tonight, so and nothing for exclusion of person public. So I wish you all farewell and good night. Good night, everybody.
Thank you. Good
Bye.
night.
Thank you, David. Bye.
Bye.
Good night. Thank you, officers.
Thank
you,
you.
officers.
Thank you.
Thus.